When did your sibling try blaming you over something idiotic? I was trying to eat my Booty-O's cereal in peace when my sister Sydney storms in holding her phone like it's evidence in a murder trial. She's got that look on her face that means she's about to accuse me of something ridiculous. This time she's convinced I'm running a hate campaign against her Instagram account where she posts makeup tutorials and outfit photos to her 15,000 followers. The whole thing started 2 weeks ago when Sydney noticed some mean comments on her posts. Nothing too crazy at first, just stuff like, "This look, isn't it?" and "Maybe try a different style." But then they got meaner. Someone said her contouring made her look like a muddy zebra. Another comment said her outfit choices were crimes against fashion. She was getting like 5 or 6 nasty comments on every post, and her engagement was tanking hard. Sydney immediately decided it had to be me. Her reasoning was that I was jealous of her success because I only had 200 followers on my photography account. She started treating me like a criminal in my own house. She'd walk past my room and whisper, "I know what you're doing," like we were in some spy movie. She changed her passwords on everything, even Netflix, which really annoyed me because I was halfway through a show. The accusations got more intense as more comments appeared. She printed out screenshots and highlighted patterns in the writing style. She said the commenter used literally too much, just like I did. She pointed out they spelled definitely wrong the same way I always did. She even analyzed the posting times and matched them to when I was home from school. She presented this folder to our parents like she was a detective solving a major case. Our parents tried to stay neutral, but Sydney was relentless. She'd bring it up during every dinner. She told our cousins at Sunday lunch that I was cyberbullying her. She made this whole PowerPoint presentation about online harassment and forced us all to watch it during family movie night. Dad fell asleep halfway through, and Mom just kept saying we should work it out ourselves. Things escalated when Sydney lost a brand deal with some small makeup company. They said her recent engagement wasn't meeting their standards. She completely lost it and burst into my room at midnight accusing me of ruining her life. She said I cost her $500 and her chance at becoming a real influencer. I was barely awake and had no idea what she was talking about, but she didn't care. She said she was going to expose me to her followers if I didn't confess. The next day, she actually did it. She posted this long story about how her own sister was behind the hate comments. She didn't use my name but showed my baby photos, which was honestly worse. Her followers were split between supporting her and calling her paranoid. Some of them started investigating like amateur detectives trying to find proof. My phone was blowing up with DMs from strangers asking if I was the evil sister. I decided enough was enough and did some investigating of my own. I spent hours looking through the accounts that left mean comments. They all seemed fake with no posts and generic usernames. But then I noticed something interesting. One account had liked an old post from 2 years ago. It was from before Sydney was even trying to be an influencer. The only people who would scroll that far back were real-life friends. I kept digging and found more clues. All the hate accounts followed the same 20 people, and they were all from our school. Then I found the smoking gun. One account had accidentally liked, then unliked a photo from Kaylin, who used to be Sydney's best friend, until Sydney ditched her for the popular crowd last year. I remembered how Kaylin had cried in the bathroom after Sydney told everyone she was too boring to hang out with anymore. I confronted Sydney with my evidence in the kitchen while she was filming a smoothie bowl tutorial. I showed her the screenshots and the connection to Kaylin. Her face went from angry to shocked to embarrassed in about 5 seconds. She tried to deny it at first, but I had receipts. Every single hate comment traced back to Kaylin and her friend group. They were getting revenge for Sydney ghosting them. Sydney had to admit to her followers that she was wrong about me. She posted an apology but made it seem like an honest mistake instead of a weeks-long harassment campaign against her own sister. Most of her followers moved on. But while we were eating dinner, our mom's phone buzzed. She looked at it and her face sunk. She showed Dad something and he dropped his fork. "Girls," Mom said slowly, "we need to talk about something. I've been running an Instagram account too, and you're never going to believe what I just found out about your sister's follower count." Mom dropped her phone right onto the table with a thud that made our plates jump. She turned it around to show us her profile, and there it was. At Suburban Mom Life 47 with a little bio that said, "Just a mom sharing recipes and crafts." The feed was full of pictures of her famous tuna casserole and those weird painted rocks she'd been making in the garage for months. Sydney's mouth fell open as she stared at the screen showing Mom had 800 followers. I couldn't believe Mom had been posting on Instagram this whole time without telling us. She'd taken photos of every single dinner she made and posted them with hashtags like #mom cooking and #casserole life. Dad leaned over to look and almost knocked over his water glass. Mom scrolled down to show posts from 6 months ago when she started the account. She'd been documenting her craft projects and getting comments from other moms about her recipes. Sydney grabbed the phone to look closer, and I saw her face change when she noticed Mom's engagement rate was actually pretty good. Mom took her phone back and opened some kind of analytics app I'd never seen before. She tapped a few buttons and pulled up Sydney's account instead of her own. The screen filled with graphs and numbers that made Sydney go completely still. Mom pointed at a chart showing follower growth over the past year. There were these huge spikes where Sydney gained thousands of followers in just a few days. The countries listed next to the spikes were Bangladesh, Russia, and Indonesia. Mom scrolled down to show the engagement statistics, and they were terrible. Less than 1% of these followers ever liked or commented on Sydney's posts. Sydney's face went white as Mom kept scrolling through the data. The analytics showed that 7,000 of Sydney's followers had joined in these weird waves that didn't match any of her viral posts or collaborations. Sydney started shaking her head and saying it wasn't what it looked like. She said she only did loop giveaways to grow her account naturally. Dad finally looked up from his plate and asked what a loop giveaway even was. Sydney tried to explain but kept stumbling over her words. I jumped in to explain since Sydney was making it more confusing. I told them how loop giveaways work, where you have to follow like 30 different accounts to enter a contest for a prize. The The problem is those followers don't actually care about your content at all. They just want the free stuff and usually unfollow later or never engage with your posts. Mom nodded and said that's exactly what the patterns were showing in the data. Sydney's shoulders slumped and she stared at her plate. She finally admitted she'd spent $200 of her birthday money on a growth service. The website promised organic reach and real followers who would love her content. She thought it would help her get more brand deals after losing the makeup company. Her voice got quieter as she explained how the service said they used advanced targeting to find her ideal audience. Mom's face softened a little and she admitted something too. She'd actually tested the same service Sydney used but only spent $20 to see what would happen. Her follower count jumped by 500 overnight, but they were all obviously fake accounts. None of them had profile pictures and their usernames were just random numbers and letters. Dad put down his fork and asked the question we were all thinking. He wanted to know exactly how much money Sydney had spent total on growing her Instagram. Sydney mumbled something we couldn't hear at first. Dad asked again, and Sydney said she'd used gift cards and birthday cash from relatives. She'd probably spent around $400 over the past 3 months on different services and promotions. I couldn't help myself and pulled out my phone to show them my photography account. I only had 200 followers, but my engagement rate was 15%. Real people actually commented on my sunset photos and shared them with their friends. Some of them even printed my photos to hang in their rooms. Sydney's face turned red and she pushed her chair back from the table. She said we didn't understand the pressure of maintaining an influencer image. Everyone at the school expected her to have tons of followers and brands wouldn't work with her if her numbers weren't high enough. She stood up and said she was going to her room. Mom and Dad exchanged worried looks as Sydney stomped up the stairs. Dad asked Mom how she even knew to look for this stuff. Mom said she'd been researching teen social media pressure for months after noticing how obsessed Sydney was getting. She wanted to understand what we were dealing with, but didn't know how to bring it up without seeming like she was spying. The rest of dinner was quiet and awkward. I helped clear the table while Mom and Dad talked in hushed voices about what to do next. They were worried about how deep Sydney had gotten into this fake follower thing. Mom kept showing Dad more data on her phone and his face got more concerned with each chart. I went to bed thinking about how Sydney must be feeling after being exposed like that. I wonder what Mom's really been up to with that secret Instagram account. Seems pretty convenient she just happens to have analytics apps and knows exactly how to spot fake followers. The timing of her big reveal right after Sydney got exposed makes me... The next morning, I woke up to Sydney yelling from her room. I ran down the hall to see what was wrong. She was staring at her phone in complete panic. Her follower count had dropped by 2,000 overnight. Instagram had done one of their bot purges where they remove fake accounts. Sydney's purchased followers were disappearing fast, and she was watching the number drop in real time. Every few seconds, another 10 or 20 followers would vanish, and Sydney kept refreshing the page like maybe it would stop if she just checked enough times. She grabbed my arm and pulled me closer to show me the screen where the number had already dropped to 13,000. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled through her notifications where 3 different brands had sent messages overnight asking about her follower demographics and engagement rates. One company that sold hair vitamins wanted to know why her audience was suddenly 40% accounts from Bangladesh when her content was all in English. Another brand that made phone cases asked if she'd been using growth services because their analytics team had flagged her account as potentially fraudulent. The third message was from a jewelry company canceling their upcoming collaboration because her engagement metrics didn't match their standards anymore. Sydney dropped her phone on the bed and covered her face with her hands while I stood there not really knowing what to say. Downstairs, Mom was making breakfast and calling us to come eat, but Sydney just sat there staring at nothing. I told her we needed to figure this out together before her whole Instagram thing completely fell apart, and she nodded without looking at me. At breakfast, Sydney kept her phone face up next to her plate and jumped every time it buzzed, which was basically every 5 seconds. Mom watched her pushing eggs around her plate and suggested we should have a family meeting after school to talk about everything that had happened. Dad agreed between bites of toast and said we needed to get to the bottom of this whole mess before it got worse. Sydney barely touched her food and left for school early saying she had to meet someone about a group project, but I knew she just wanted to avoid more questions. At the school, I headed straight to the computer lab during my free period because I remembered Beckett Allen had been working on some social media analytics project for his coding class. He was sitting in the back corner with 3 monitors open showing different graphs and data streams. I asked if he could help me understand something about Instagram followers, and he got this excited look like I'd just asked him about his favorite topic. He pulled up a chair for me and asked for Sydney's username, which made me hesitate for a second, but I figured we needed real answers. Within minutes, Beckett had Sydney's account data spread across his screens, showing follower growth patterns and engagement metrics that looked like mountain ranges and valleys. He pointed at a huge spike from 3 months ago, where she gained 2,000 followers in one day, which he said was basically impossible without buying them or doing follow loops. Then he showed me individual follower profiles, and I could see the patterns immediately with usernames like user7364829 and account 9472651 that followed 7,000 accounts but had 0 posts of their own. Beckett explained how bot farms worked and showed me databases where you could buy followers in packages starting at $10 for 1,000 fake accounts. He pulled up more data showing that at least 40% of Sydney's followers had joined in suspicious waves that matched known bot patterns perfectly. The evidence was completely overwhelming, and Beckett said he could write up a full report if we needed it for something official. I thanked him and took screenshots of everything before heading to lunch, where I grabbed my usual table in the corner. Halfway through my sandwich, Kaylin appeared next to my table looking nervous and asked if she could sit down. She apologized immediately for the whole hate comment thing and said watching Sydney have a complete meltdown on Instagram made her realize revenge wasn't worth all this drama. She explained how she and 5 other girls from their old friend group had made those fake accounts to leave mean comments on Sydney's posts. They'd spent hours coming up with insults and timing their comments to make it look random, but coordinated enough to really hurt Sydney's engagement. Kaylin said they felt justified because of how Sydney had ditched them all last year and literally called her boring in front of the entire cafeteria. She remembered crying in the bathroom for an hour after Sydney told everyone she'd outgrown her middle school friends and needed to find people on her level. The other girls in their group had been planning this revenge for months, and they'd gotten carried away with making it worse and worse each week. Kaylin said she was done with it now and had already deleted all the fake accounts because seeing Sydney's life fall apart wasn't as satisfying as she'd thought it would be. After school, I rushed home to find Beckett already there with his laptop set up on our dining room table, showing Mom and Dad his analysis. He'd made these professional-looking graphs that proved at least 40% of Sydney's followers were definitely fake or completely inactive accounts. Sydney sat at the end of the table with her arms crossed, trying to look angry, but I could see she was about to cry. Beckett explained how the bot patterns were obvious once you knew what to look for, and showed my parents the same usernames and follow patterns he'd shown me earlier. Mom asked Sydney directly if she'd bought followers, and Sydney's face crumpled as tears started rolling down her cheeks. She admitted she felt trapped in this cycle where every time she bought followers, she needed to buy more to maintain the illusion that she was growing. She'd started with just 100 followers to get over a milestone, but then brands started noticing her, and she felt like she couldn't stop. The pressure to hit certain numbers for sponsorships made her keep buying more and more until she couldn't tell which followers were real anymore. Mom put her hand on Sydney's shoulder and shared that she'd been researching teen social media pressure for months after noticing how obsessed Sydney was becoming with her numbers. She'd created her own Instagram account to understand what we were going through, but hadn't known how to bring it up without seeming like she was spying on us. She'd read dozens of articles about kids spending their college funds on fake followers and getting caught in addiction cycles with social media validation. Dad cleared his throat and said we needed to set clear rules about money and social media going forward with no more buying followers or likes or comments. He said any sponsored content or brand deals had to be discussed as a family before Sydney agreed to anything. Sydney nodded while wiping her eyes and said she understood, but that everyone at the school would know she was a fraud when her numbers kept dropping. I looked at Sydney sitting there with tears still on her face and told her she needed to just tell the truth to her real followers. She shook her head and said people would hate her even more, but I pulled up my phone and showed her examples of other influencers who admitted buying followers and actually gained respect. Mom nodded and said honesty was the only way forward, while Dad started clearing the dinner plates and muttering about how complicated social media made everything. Sydney grabbed her laptop and started typing out different versions of an apology post, but kept deleting them because nothing sounded right. She'd write a paragraph, then groan and hit backspace over and over while I watched from across the table. Mom suggested she just write it like she was talking to a friend instead of trying to sound professional. Sydney typed for 20 minutes straight while we all sat there waiting and finally turned the screen toward us to show her draft. It explained how she felt pressured to keep up with other influencers and made bad choices buying followers to seem more successful than she was. She included screenshots of the sketchy growth service emails and admitted she'd spent hundreds of dollars trying to fake her way to fame. Her phone buzzed and she looked down to see a text from Raina Sutherland, who was in the popular group at the school. Raina was admitting she was the one who told Sydney about the follower service in the first place, because she'd used it too. The text said Raina got $50 for every person she referred to the service, which made Sydney's face turn red. She screenshot the conversation immediately and showed us how Raina had basically used her desperation to make money. Raina had sent her the link 3 months ago when Sydney was crying about only having 5,000 followers and promised it was totally safe. Sydney added the screenshots to her draft post to show how these services target insecure teens through their own friends. The next morning at the school, I was walking to first period when the office secretary called my name over the intercom. She said Cheryl Mann, the school counselor, needed to see me, Sydney, and Kaylin immediately in her office. I walked down the hall wondering who reported the whole mess and found Sydney already sitting in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs. Kaylin came in a minute later looking nervous and sat as far from Sydney as possible in the small room. Cheryl closed the door and explained someone had reported the cyberbullying situation, and the school had to investigate it officially. She pulled out a folder with printed screenshots of the mean comments and Sydney's public posts about being bullied by her sister. Kaylin started talking really fast about how Sydney had humiliated her in front of everyone last year and completely destroyed their friendship. Sydney's follower count dropping faster than my grades in math class while she refreshes like the app might suddenly change its mind. Peak teenage tragedy right there, watching fake friends disappear into the digital void one refresh at a time. She explained how Sydney had literally announced in the cafeteria that Kaylin was too boring and basic to hang out with anymore. Tears started rolling down Kaylin's face as she described spending lunch alone in the library for months after losing her best friend. Sydney's shoulders started shaking, and she finally said she was sorry for real this time, not just because she got caught. She admitted she'd been so focused on becoming popular that she forgot Kaylin had been her friend since 2nd grade. Cheryl handed them both sheets of paper and said they needed to write impact statements about how the situation affected them. She wanted to use this as a teaching moment for the whole school about online behavior and real friendships. Both girls spent the rest of the period writing while I sat there as a witness, since I'd been dragged into everything. Cheryl collected the papers and said she'd be sharing them anonymously at the next assembly about digital citizenship. After school, Sydney's phone dinged with an email notification from Brian Coates at the makeup company she'd lost the deal with. He said they'd been following the situation and were actually impressed she was planning to come clean about the fake followers. The email explained that they valued authenticity over numbers and would work with her if she posted her honest confession publicly. Sydney showed me the email with shaking hands and said this was her chance to start over the right way. She spent another hour editing her post to include everything including the Raina situation and her apology to Kaylin. She added a section about the pressure teens face to seem perfect online and how it leads to bad decisions. Finally, at 7 that night, she hit post and immediately threw her phone across her bed, not wanting to see the reactions. Within minutes, her notifications started going crazy as people read her confession about buying 7,000 fake followers. Some people unfollowed immediately, calling her a fraud and saying they couldn't trust anything she posted anymore. But other people started sharing their own stories in the comments about feeling pressured to buy likes or followers. Girls from the school admitted they'd considered buying followers too, but were scared of getting caught like Sydney just did. The post got shared in influencer watchdog groups where people debated whether she deserved a second chance or not. By midnight, Sydney had lost 2,000 real followers, but gained hundreds of comments from people saying they respected her honesty. The next morning, Sydney's phone was still going crazy with notifications, but she actually put it in a drawer during breakfast and ate her eggs without checking it once. Mom announced we were having a phone-free dinner that night, and nobody was allowed to argue about it. Dad actually looked relieved and said he'd been wanting to try that new pasta recipe without someone filming every step. After school, I found an email from Beckett with a 20-page PDF attached, showing all his data analysis about Sydney's followers with graphs and charts and everything. I forwarded it straight to Brian at the makeup company, and added a note about how Sydney was trying to fix things the right way now. He replied within an hour saying he was impressed by the documentation, and would discuss it with his team about possibly working with Sydney again. Over the next few days, Sydney watched her follower count drop from 12,000 to 10,000, then finally settle at around 8,000 real people who actually cared about her content. She stopped checking the number every 5 minutes and started focusing on making videos she actually enjoyed, instead of what she thought would get the most likes. At the school on Wednesday, 3 different girls came up to Sydney during lunch asking about her confession post, and admitting they'd been thinking about buying followers too. One sophomore showed Sydney her phone with an ad for the same growth service Sydney had used and asked if it was really that bad. Sydney spent the whole lunch period showing them the bot accounts and explaining how the companies just take your money and give you fake numbers that don't help at all. By Friday, she had a small group of kids meeting in the library to talk about social media pressure and how to grow accounts without cheating. Meanwhile, Raina was posting stories claiming she had no idea the service she recommended sold fake followers and that she was a victim too. She said the company lied to her about their methods, and she would never knowingly promote something dishonest. Nobody at the school believed her, especially after screenshots started going around showing her getting referral payments for each person who signed up. 3 different small brands that worked with Raina posted statements saying they were reviewing their partnerships after discovering suspicious patterns in her engagement rates. Her follower count started dropping fast as people realized she'd been lying about her numbers too. On Saturday morning, while Sydney was editing a video, I sat down next to her and suggested maybe she and Kaylin should make a post together about what happened between them. Sydney looked uncomfortable but didn't immediately say no, which was progress. I explained they didn't have to be best friends again, but they could show other kids that friendships can survive social media drama if people are honest about their mistakes. Sydney texted Kaylin that afternoon, and they agreed to meet at the school on Monday to talk about it with Cheryl supervising. They spent an hour in Cheryl's office planning what they wanted to say, and how to make it helpful instead of just drama. On Tuesday, they filmed the video in the empty cafeteria after school, with Cheryl sitting off camera making sure things stayed positive. It was awkward watching them try to explain how Sydney choosing popularity over friendship led to Kaylin's revenge campaign, but they both took responsibility for their parts. Kaylin admitted the hate comments went too far, and Sydney acknowledged that ditching your best friend publicly was cruel, no matter how much you wanted to fit in. They posted it Wednesday morning with a long caption about how they were working on rebuilding trust even if they'd never be close like before. The video got way more views than either of them expected, with kids from other schools sharing it and adding their own stories about friendships ruined by social media. That Thursday, Brian emailed Sydney with a new offer from the makeup company for a 3-month trial campaign focused on authentic beauty and real engagement. The contract was super strict about not buying any followers or engagement, and included regular audits of her account metrics. The payment was way less than the original deal, but it was based on actual engagement rates, not just follower counts, so Sydney could grow it over time. She signed it immediately, and started planning content that felt genuine instead of trying to copy what other influencers were doing. I decided to put together a photo series about our whole family intervention, using candid shots I'd taken over the past few weeks without anyone noticing. I posted them on my photography account with captions explaining what was happening in each image, like Sydney crying over her laptop, or Mom showing us the bot analysis. Real photographers started following me and commenting on the composition and storytelling, which felt way better than any amount of fake followers could. My account grew from 200 to 400 followers over the week, but they were all actual photographers or people interested in documentary work. Some of them even gave me tips on editing and suggested competitions I should enter with the series. On Sunday night, Sydney knocked on my door holding her phone and asked if I wanted to be in her next video about studying techniques. I told her she had to ask permission every single time she wanted to film me, and couldn't just assume I'd say yes. She agreed and said she wouldn't post anything with me in it without showing me first. I made her promise not to use any embarrassing photos from when we were kids unless I specifically said it was okay. We wrote up actual rules on notebook paper about boundaries, like no filming in my room without permission, and no investigating each other's accounts unless asked for help. Mom laminated the list and stuck it on the fridge next to the chore chart, which was embarrassing, but probably necessary to keep us from falling back into old patterns. A week passed with everyone actually following the rules when my phone started blowing up during lunch on Monday. My cousin had posted a video clip of our kitchen argument about the bot scandal, and tagged it with hashtags about family drama and influencer fails. The video showed Mom holding up her phone with the analytics while Sydney was crying, and Dad was yelling about wasted money. Within 3 hours, it had over 2,000 views just in our town, and kids from the school were sharing it everywhere. I watched the video angle and noticed it was filmed from the corner by the pantry where my cousin always sat during family dinners. The timestamp matched exactly when we had that huge fight last Tuesday. I screenshot everything and sent it straight to the family group chat, calling out my cousin for recording us without permission during a private moment. Mom saw my message immediately and made them take down the video, but screenshots were already spreading through Instagram stories and TikTok. That night, Mom sat us down and admitted something nobody expected. She had actually bought 100 followers for her recipe account 6 months ago, when she first started posting. She pulled up her phone and showed us the exact service she used and how much she paid, which was $20. She deleted all the fake followers right there in front of us one by one to show she was serious about accountability. The timing of Mom's confession feels really convenient after calling out Sydney for weeks about this exact same thing. She bought followers 6 months ago, but only mentions it now when the whole family's dealing with this mess. Makes me wonder what else people aren't. Dad suggested we needed actual written rules about social media since verbal agreements weren't working. We spent 2 hours writing up a real contract on Mom's laptop with specific rules about spending limits, privacy boundaries, and being transparent about any promotional services. Everyone had to sign it, including Dad, who didn't even have social media, but wanted to show support. The contract said no recording family arguments, no buying any type of engagement, and everyone had to disclose if brands contacted them. Sydney knocked on my door Thursday night holding her laptop and asked if I could help edit her long post about everything that happened. She had written 5 pages about the pressure to buy followers and how it spiraled out of control, but it was all over the place. We sat on my bed for 3 hours cutting it down and organizing her thoughts into something people would actually read. She kept trying to add fancy words, but I made her change them to normal language that sounded like her actual voice. We uploaded it Friday morning with a simple title about fake followers and real consequences. Within 6 hours, it had more comments and shares than anything Sydney had posted before. People were sharing their own stories about buying followers and feeling trapped by the numbers game. Teachers from the school were commenting about how brave Sydney was for being honest. Even some bigger influencers reposted it talking about the pressure young creators face. The principal called our house Saturday morning saying the school wanted us to speak at a digital wellness assembly the following week. They wanted Sydney, Kaylin, and me to share our different perspectives on how the whole situation got so out of control. We agreed, but only if Cheryl would moderate to keep things from getting too personal or dramatic. Brian from the makeup company emailed Sydney Sunday with a revised contract that was completely different from the original one. It had strict rules about authenticity, but also included resources for mental health support and dealing with online pressure. The payment structure was based on real engagement and community building instead of just follower counts. He said the company was impressed by Sydney's honesty and wanted to support creators who were transparent about their struggles. Beckett showed up at the school Monday with a huge grin because our computer teacher had seen his analytics work on Sydney's account. The teacher was so impressed with Beckett's coding and data analysis that he connected him with a tech company offering summer internships for high school students. Beckett would be working with their social media analytics team, learning about bot detection and engagement metrics. Saturday morning, Dad announced we were all going to the farmer's market and phones had to stay at home. I grabbed my actual camera, the one I got for my birthday 2 years ago that I barely used anymore. At the market, I took portraits of the vendors selling vegetables and homemade soap instead of posting Instagram stories. The woman selling honey let me photograph her explaining how she collected it from her backyard hives. An old man selling wooden toys showed me pieces he'd been carving for 40 years. I got their email addresses to send them the photos later, which felt more personal than just tagging them online. That Sunday night, Sydney knocked on my door holding a piece of paper and a bunch of colored markers she'd stolen from Mom's craft supplies. She wanted to make a calendar for the kitchen about when she could film without me walking through in my pajamas. We sat on my floor and drew out the whole week with different colors for filming zones and quiet times. Monday through Wednesday, she got the kitchen from 4 to 6 for her after-school content. I got Thursday and Friday mornings for taking photos of my breakfast without her makeup lights blinding me. Weekends, we'd have to check with each other first. She also agreed the bathroom was off limits for filming after 9 p.m. because I kept having to hold it while she did skincare routines. We taped the calendar to the fridge and Mom added her own times for when she needed to cook without cameras everywhere. Tuesday at the school, Kaylin found Sydney at her locker and showed her a flyer she'd made about digital safety. The school was letting them use the gym for a fundraiser if they could get enough volunteers. Sydney looked uncomfortable but said she'd help set up tables and make posters. They weren't going to be friends again, but Kaylin said working together on something positive might help them both move on from the drama. They spent lunch in the library making a list of local businesses to ask for donations. The computer teacher offered to do a presentation about spotting fake accounts. Cheryl said she'd supervise and make sure things stayed focused on education, not their personal issues. By Thursday, they had 17 volunteers signed up, and 3 local shops donating gift cards for the raffle. Friday morning, I got an email from the art teacher saying my farmer's market photos were selected for the spring showcase. She wanted 3 prints for the main hallway display, plus 2 more for the district competition. I'd submitted them not really expecting anything since usually the seniors got picked. The photos were just simple portraits of the vendors, but the teacher said they showed real connection and authenticity. She needed the prints by next Friday, so I had to figure out how to get them printed properly at the photo shop downtown. Sydney actually offered to drive me since she was going that way to return some makeup she'd bought with her fake follower money. 2 weeks passed since Mom's big revelation about the bots, and our house felt completely different. Sydney was down to 8,000 real followers, but her comments were actually from people who cared about her content. She'd post maybe 3 times a week instead of constantly filming everything. Mom kept posting her casserole recipes to her 300 real followers, who actually tried making them. I was working on my portfolio for the art showcase and getting actual photography tips from people online. Dad even downloaded Instagram just to follow all three of us, though he never posted anything himself. The family contract we'd signed was still on the fridge next to Sydney's filming schedule, and everyone was actually following it. Thanks for letting me pepper this journey with puns and observations. Your company definitely made the commentary twice as clever. Catch you on the flip side. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.